Entitled dad threatens to kill 3 young girls over fish. So I've been working retail for only about 6 months and have had a few entitled people, but this one is by far the worst. For context, I, 16F, have a job at a local pet store. The store is small and has only about 8 employees. On this day, I was working the register with another girl, 18, and my manager, F23, who was in the back. I had just clocked in and had to walk past the fish section where my manager was getting fish for this family consisting of the entitled dad, Ed, entitled mom, M, and their 2 kids, probably around 5 and 6. Before anything even happens, I get red flags from these people. Their cart is filled with fish supplies and a brand new tank. Anyone who knows anything about fish knows you can't buy a tank/accessories and fish on the same day because you need to cycle the tank for a few days first. We always tell this to customers if they ask to buy fish. However, as my manager is getting them fish, I assume the little kid threw a fit and the parents just gave in, so I try my best to stay out of their way and just know I'll be returning some fish in a few days. Around the same time, an elderly man comes in wanting to return a harness. I tell him if he wants to exchange it, he can go get a different size and I'll do it in one transaction. He agrees and goes to find a new one. When he comes back a few minutes later, he walks up to my register just as the entitled family and their heap of fish items come around the corner. The elderly man most likely didn't see them and I start his transaction. I wouldn't have even known they were there had Ed and M started loudly groaning about people not being able to wait their turn in a line. I check out the old man and he goes to leave. As he's walking out, Ed and M start loudly complaining again, throwing around curses and insults to see what would stick to the poor man. I start checking the people out as nicely as I can, keeping mostly quiet and avoiding eye contact in hopes that I can finish the whole process quickly. Ed and M are throwing stuff onto the counter with such force I'm surprised nothing broke. Their little brats keep handing me small things and saying scan this now and do this one. I can't really fault the kids, but just from their tone, I can guess how their parents were raising them. Soon Ed gets sick of waiting and sends his family out to the car. I finally finish scanning everything and the total comes out to well over $300. Ed is looking very impatient now and I can tell he's on the brink of storming out. He puts in his card and pays, but when the transaction is done, my system closes it out. Confused, I check the transaction history, nothing. I call up my manager and explain the situation. Ed is looking very pissed off at this point and I'm starting to worry he might yell. My manager calls up her boss to see what we should do. The Ed shows that on his side, his bank transaction says, pending. However, on our side, the transaction didn't happen. After a long call with my boss, in which the Ed keeps looking angrier and angrier, my manager finally hangs up. Manager, so sir, I'm sorry but it looks like I can't let you leave with the product. This has happened before, but... Ed, throwing up his hands, you know what? Fuck this. Just FCK it. He pushes the cart away and turns to my manager. Ed, fuck this store. Fuck all of you. Fuck it. The man storms out and my manager is on the brink of tears. She tells us that he'd get the money back and we just have to run it again, but I guess he didn't want to wait. The cashier behind me is also close to crying. I'm just quiet and start to grab the cart of stuff to put away. Just then, the man storms back in. Ed, now screaming, and if I don't get my F-king money back, I'll F-king kill all of you. He storms out again, leaving my manager now sobbing and me shaking. I turn to my coworker behind me and go to say something when I catch movement out of the corner of my eye. He's back again. Ed, no, I want all of your F-king names. I want to know your name, and hers, pointing to me, and hers, and I want to know who you were F-king talking to on the phone. My manager is crying and trying her best to help the man. She grabs some paper and starts to scribble stuff down while I watches her intently. I want to tell her not to give him my name, but I trust her so I stay quiet. Meanwhile, a nurse from the urgent care clinic next door comes in and comes up to me. She asks if everything is okay and I just shake my head no. She stands next to me and the other cashier with her arms crossed, staring at the man towering over my crying manager. My manager once again calls my boss on the phone and pleads with her to tell her what to do. She finally hangs up and tells the man she's sorry about what happened and he can take the stuff and go. Suddenly, it's like a switch was flipped. He's all, "There's no need to cry and you've been so helpful." He actually at one point grabbed her hand and told her it was okay and she didn't need to be upset. Then he grabbed his card and started to leave. "Oh, could I have a receipt in case anything happens?" Manager, trying not to completely break down, "Sir, the transaction didn't go through. We don't have a receipt." So if they die, I'm just out of luck?" Manager, "I'm sorry sir, I'm trying my best, but I really can't do anything. Have a nice day." She then runs off to the back sobbing. The man then mumbles something about thanks for help and quickly leaves with his free cart of supplies. I'm just glaring at this man while I can hear the cashier behind me also crying. After he leaves, the nurse asks if we're all okay. Of course, we're all terrified. She offers to call the police or send in some buff male nurses from next door to stand with us. We decline both, and say we can't do much now. Our manager calls in help and leaves not 20 minutes after. The worst part is we have nothing on the man. We don't have his name, number, or even cameras. We all know we should have called the police, but at the time, we were scared he would have done something if we had tried. As of yet, we haven't seen the man again. And I doubt we ever will. So now you've heard my terrifying tale. Hopefully, I'll be starting a new job at a Starbucks soon, so I doubt this is the last story I'll have of entitled parents. I don't know how people can work in customer service for years. Major respect to you guys. Parents accused me of ruining Christmas every year, now wonder why I hate Christmas. I posted a story on here a little while ago and people seem to enjoy it. My parents, bless their hearts because I do truly love them, are full of entitled parent moments. Here's another one. One of my parents' many deep wounds is that because they grew up poor, they never got the magical sort of Hallmark kind of Christmas they grew up seeing on TV. Fair. But unfortunately for my brother and I, who were raised upper middle class, that meant that our Christmases were more elaborate vicarious wish fulfillment role-playing scenes than they were a holiday while I was growing up. Christmas had to be this perfect event, filmed and documented ad nauseum. We spent just as much of the evening before and the morning of posing for forced family photos as we did anything else. There was more yelling and screaming that things go exactly as planned than those photos suggested, but back then I thought that was normal. The big sticking point every year was naturally the most vapid and consumerist part of the whole event, the presents. For context, I have always had one true passion my whole life. I've been drawing, sculpting, painting and sewing since I was a very young kid. I work professionally full-time as an artist now. I still have my first sketchbook from when I was 5 years old, full of drawing of me trying to replicate the anime characters I watched on TV. And I never had enough supplies, I was always running out. As I got older especially, I was desperate for more advanced, and expensive, tools like resin casting and drawing tablets. My point being, there were clear and obvious choices for presents. I put almost nothing but art supplies, and maybe a DS or a specific book on the Christmas list my mom asked for us to make for her every year. Only, my mom had a very interesting gift-giving habit. Despite asking for Christmas lists, my mom would often get only one, maybe two things on them. She wanted the day to be a surprise, so she often just bought whatever she wanted. And when it came to buying gifts for me, her daughter, that often meant buying things she wanted. Things she would have liked when she was my age, again trying to vicariously get the childhood she wanted. Not only that, but my mom wanted to buy me things that she felt looked impressive to share online. And art supplies wasn't impressive to her. So she'd get me expensive jewelry and clothing, weird gadgets, extremely overpriced bathroom products for some reason, and then maybe a few cheap art tools or materials. Which, you know, is fine. I wasn't a greedy kid, and I appreciate the thought, of course. I didn't complain. But a polite, "Thank you so much," and a smile wasn't enough of a reaction for my parents. I guess I wasn't a very good actor, and they could tell when I wasn't being genuine about liking something. They'd start interrogating me immediately. "Don't lie, why don't you like it? What's wrong with it? I thought you'd like it." And then, feeling backed into a corner, I'd be honest with them, that I don't really like what they got me, even though I appreciate the thought. That always led into, "Do you know how much I paid for that? I would have killed to get something that nice for Christmas." "You're so spoiled, we grew up dirt poor and you don't know what it's like not to get a Christmas at all," etc. I would end up feeling so guilty and ungrateful by the end of it, often locking myself in the bathroom or going into my room to cry after. Which, like it was tradition, would prompt my dad to say to me every year, "You ruined Christmas." Christmas to this day has become an unbelievably stressful time of year for me. I can't look through photos of particularly bad years without crying still. In my mid-teens I developed what was basically a nervous reaction where I'd be holding back tears and fighting to keep myself calm from the dreaded anxiety of just having to open presents. That made it worse, because whether I liked what they got me or not, they interpreted it as me being difficult and snobby, so I'd get guaranteed yelled at or berated for hours afterwards. Christmas became nightmare ordeals, prompting some of the worst fights I've ever had with my parents, not really much to do with the gifts themselves and more so how I was never happy ever and how it was ruining the whole family. This was particularly embarrassing when it happened in front of extended family over for the holiday. I got a reputation in the whole family for being a bratty teenage girl because my parents would talk shit to them after the fight was over. It was degrading and humiliating. When I was 13, that was the first year I asked them just to not get presents at all for me. That I just wanted to enjoy the time with family, that's what really mattered to me. I was thrown through a loop at the time when telling them this somehow made them angrier at me. They always brought up money, how I wasn't appreciative of how much I have compared to when they were growing up, so I thought this was the obvious solution. I thought the problem was I had too much obviously, and needed less. They accused me of not wanting to participate in Christmas at all, even though I still wanted to celebrate the holiday with them. That made everything even worse that year when Christmas did happen. Every single year I begged them to just not buy me anything, that I was fine. That never worked, and it was like we were all cursed to relive the same dramatic fight over again come December without fail. They did the same thing to my brother, accused him of being ungrateful spoiled, but he was always better at keeping his feelings on the inside. He didn't understand why I couldn't just stonewall it like he could. I felt so shitty about how every year no matter how hard I tried I'd crack and start crying. I am now an adult, of course. I don't live with them anymore. I've asked them several times if they really even want me to come down and be there when they'll have a better time with just my brother. I tell them I can come down and see them every other day of the year, but as I ruin Christmas without fail I shouldn't be there on the day itself for everyone's sake. They get offended by the idea, so I end up coming down. They're utterly befuddled as to why I despise Christmas as much as I do when it's such a happy time of the year. I started telling them it's because I have a strong distaste for the consumerist aspect of it, which is true, but obviously it also very much has to do with the association of shame, guilt and humiliation. That seemed to have been the magic key though, because this year finally they agreed to not get me any presents. We compromised by them helping me get some new equipment for work, which was very generous of them and I very much appreciate it. I love my fancy new work computer that can all my work applications much better than my old one. This last Christmas went pretty well because of that. They complained the whole time and acted like it was such a shame I didn't have anything to open on Christmas Day, but I felt much more at ease. I just kept reminding them how much I love my work computer. I feel like a weight has been lifted and that Christmases will be so much easier to manage now that presents aren't in the equation. Still though, they know I have nothing but negative feelings towards it, and that refuse to celebrate it with any of the partners I've had since the last thing I want us to bring that nightmare holiday into my relationship.